watch drama, watch drama. So typically I don't like to do these types of videos where we're focusing on drama that's going in the watch world, but this in particular is of interest. One, because it's me, but two, because I believe that there are some good points to take away, some knowledge, some scholarship that can be taken away from this discussion. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, I have a watch for sale, a Vacheron Constantin reference 4195. And over the last couple of weeks, there has been some drama surrounding this watch. People thinking that it's not original, that the dial is refinished, that it's altogether a fake. So I'd like to take the time and the opportunity to get into that now. So a gentleman that was interested in this watch posted on Reddit asking for people's opinions, which is something that I, quite frankly, encourage everybody to do, even with the watches that I sell. I have nothing to hide. I think that people going out and doing their own due diligence and getting other people's opinions, and it's a fantastic thing. It's one more safeguard against buying something that the seller claimed is original and wasn't all original. Two, I think that discussions like these are beneficial. These are how watch forums used to be, where there was an even exchange of information, it was open communication, it was back and forth. This leads to scholarship, this furthers our understanding and historical perspective of the brands we love, therefore it's a good thing. The only time it's something that's negative is one of the parties gets offended, then we resort to personal attacks and insults and things like that. Now, before I get into the discussion, I would like to define a couple of things that will help us understand better in this discussion going forward. We're going to be talking about enamel dials. When talking about enamel dials, there are two different ways that we refer to when we're talking about something done to the dial. One is a refinishing. A refinishing of a dial means that the signature has been removed, the original one, and somebody, usually aftermarket, meaning not done by the house itself, rewrote the word Vacheron and Constantin Geneve, by themselves. This obviously results in a significant impact on a watch's value because the dial is no longer considered original. Next, we're talking about a cleaning of a dial. When we're talking about cleaning an enamel dial, what that means is the top coat is removed. However, the original signature, because of the way the dial was produced, remains intact. Now you might be asking yourself, why would somebody remove the top coat? Well, with an enamel dial, if you remove that top coat, then you're essentially taking away any patina, staining, potential scratches, and things of that nature, and the dial will look pretty much brand new. That's why enamel dials were hard to manufacture and why they're extremely valuable. They just, if well taken care of, last forever. Because the signature remains intact, this effect on the value, while it still devalues the watch, it's to a much lesser degree than refinishing. Okay, so now that we have those two definitions of what can be done to an enamel dial out of the way, let's get into the discussion. So somebody posted the watch on Reddit and then asks for people's opinions. So one comment that comes up is, yes, it's a redial, but a very good one. As you notice, there isn't any age to the dial. The accent is missing over the E, and the concentric circles are missing in the subdial. Now, this comment is an example of the whole motto, a little bit of information can get you into a lot of trouble. This gentleman knows some things about Vacheron and Constantin, or watch collecting in general, but clearly doesn't know enough to make a definitive claim like that. And why is that? Well, for one, this watch in question does have concentric circles in the subdial. So right there off the bat, part of his statement is wrong, yet he's already made a definitive claim that this is a redial. This same watch was posted in Reddit on a subreddit called Vacheron Nisas that is moderated by a gentleman going by the name of Timeset_VC. This gentleman also, like I said, demonstrates that he knows a fair bit amount of knowledge, but clearly doesn't understand the entire picture. That coupled with what appears to be language barriers is resulting in some issues where we're not able to have an exchange of ideas. He did remove my comments from the subreddit, and I wanted to take my time to make this video to be able to provide my side of the argument. So we'll go through them in order. The first thing that he addresses my comment regarding this being a refurbished watch from the house itself. I had written that it was hypothesized that this is a less collectionnaires example, except those cases are entirely different. They have non-drilled lugs at 2 and 5 o'clock position. This one does. So someone received a less collectionnaires watch and then decided to take a refinished dial and magically source an original case. I think that's a stretch. He responds, also nonsense. As I said before, the drilled lugs are not original. We know that. That doesn't mean that this case isn't original. What that means is that this is not a less collectionnaires example. Like I've said, they would have refurbished the entire watch, not just the dial in general. They would have taken the case, made it look brand new so that it has no wear. That's not the case here. There's a decent amount of wear on the case. Next, he responds to my comment, if Vacheron themselves did the restoration, then you mean to tell me that they did an exact one-to-one copy of an original dial, including enamel, raised enamel signature, raised enamel railroad, minute track, snailed sub-seconds register, and exact typography, but glaringly left out the apostrophe and Swiss. He states, but Vacheron does not reproduce vintage dials to the original standards. Then he gives an exception, and he says it's simply impossible to do so. They try to come close to the original, that's it. The restored dials are an authentic, modern variant of the dial. So he's admitting that Vacheron does reproduce vintage-inspired dials with an attempt at the original typography and font. Again, if they're going to such an extent to use the fonts from the 1940s, wouldn't they have put in an apostrophe if that was a standard to do so? I mean, think about it, it just doesn't make sense. They've taken the time to print the dial in enamel with a raised enamel signature, something that they're not really doing anymore today, and using that same font style but not putting the apostrophe. Why would they do that if that was the original standard? It doesn't make sense. Next, he responds to my comment, the topic of an apostrophe on Geneve for vintage Vacheron has been covered time and time again. Again, its presence or absence does not indicate an original dial or conversely a refinished dial. It varied with original examples documented even within the same year. He goes on to state, if the accent above E in Geneve is missing, it is indeed always an indication that something has happened to the dial. The original dials without Swiss printed is true, but that's an exception, not the rule. This is just simply not the case, right? The reason I say that is because we have other dial variations that are pretty definitive. The scholarship, the material on this is pretty definitive at this point. So I go on to give a number of examples, one of which is an example of a personal Vacheron that I own in my collection, a reference 4073. This watch uses an incised dial, meaning that somebody by hand inscribed the signature Vacheron and Constantin Geneve into the dial. This dial has no placeholder for an apostrophe over Geneve. It's not there. It's missing altogether. So even if it was cleaned, wasn't clean, it doesn't matter because there's no inscription of an apostrophe over Geneve. Furthermore, there are a number of examples, many of which are guilloche with a raised enamel signature on the plate that have remained untouched, that simply don't have an accent over Geneve. To further my point, I have posted a link from the website Watch Pro Site, which is a vintage watch forum that specializes in many different brands and has subforums for each one. Vacheron and Constantin included. There's a comment by Dean, the moderator for Vacheron and Constantin subforum, who has also worked with the Hour Lounge and is closely connected to the brand itself, who goes on record stating that this just simply is not the case. If this wasn't enough evidence, I also took it upon myself to get the collective opinions of other individuals in the community. I got a response from Ronnie, a gentleman who has been featured in many watch publications and was a guest on Hodinkie's Talking Watches. He's a collector of Vacheron for many decades. He goes on to state the same exact thing, that the accent above Geneve was not a factory standard. And we can see that in this conversation right here. So we have original dials that had no placeholders for the accent. We have the very moderator for Vacheron and Constantin on Watch Pro site, the gentleman who has worked with the Hour Lounge and has been closely linked to the brand itself. We have Ronnie from Talking Watches, and many other original examples to illustrate that this just simply isn't the case. Finally, he takes the opportunity to respond to my last comment, which was, the absence of Swiss is already explained. The import code VXN, in my experience, watches imported into the US did not have a designation of Swiss at the bottom. This makes sense. It would also explain the example utilize a 17 jewel version of a 453 instead of the Geneva sealed 18 jewel to avoid duties. He responds, that's again complete nonsense. The VXN was an import code to identify the watch as a Swiss produced watch, and the 18 jewel caliber 458 with Geneva seal was not available in 1946. Well, I don't know why we're talking about a caliber 458 when we're clearly discussing a 453. Also, I think, again, because of the language barrier, he's missing my point, which is it's plausible that Swiss is missing on this dial because this watch was imported into the United States. Typically, watches that are imported to the United States don't have a Swiss designation at the bottom. And typically, when they would import those movements, they would always be 17 jewel movements. The reason this is because taxes were levied against gold cases being imported into the United States. So many times they were manufactured locally and the watch was encased and put together as a whole within the country. Second of all, the United States had another legislation going on during that time period, which was there was a tax imposed on watch movements that were greater than 17 jewels. So the caliber 453 came in two different variants with many other subvariants, but a 17 jewel non-Geneva seal movement and an 18 jewel movement with the Geneva seal stamp on there. So I'm theorizing here that Swiss is missing because obviously this watch is imported into the United States. We know that because of this import code. We know that because the 17 jewel, like I said, is done to avoid more taxes. So this might be the reason why Swiss is missing at the bottom of the dial. He's already confused himself because he's talking about a different caliber, so I'm not sure that there's a need for rebuttal at this point. I hope you guys found this video informative. I know he got a little bit into the weeds with regards to enamel dials, but to be honest, that's the stuff that I love. I love to kind of get into the nitty-gritty and further my knowledge with all this stuff, so I hope you guys had some good things that you could take away from it, some things that you learned. If you did like the video and you like the content that we're producing, I would love if you could hit that like and subscribe button. And if you have any suggestions for further videos in the future, you can leave a comment down below. Thank you guys.